For me, flying is the best profession in the world. As a young pilot, I could hardly believe I was being so well paid to leave the ordinary behind and below me and take to boundless skies, conquering vast distances at tremendous speed. And I found time when not flying to write. Aviation gave me the opportunity to experience countless adventures in the legendary settings of Greenland, Iceland, Britannia, and Europe. My love of winged exploration began with my father, Grant, who learned to fly in the golden age of aviation. I grew up on stories of Lucky Lindy and the indomitable Eddie Rickenbacker. When I was 13, my dad took me to Tehachapi, California, known for its ideal soaring conditions, for my first flight lesson in an aircraft, a Schweitzer glider. 2 years later, my father bought our family a 1946 Taylorcraft BC-12D, which was even then considered an antique aircraft. Burning only 3.5 gallons of fuel an hour, it was cheap to fly and was a pure delight. My flight instructor was Johnny Weir, a former World War I fighter pilot. He was getting on in years and frequently fell fast asleep during my lessons. Nonetheless, I soloed at age 16 and soon thereafter earned my private pilot certificate. I became a certified commercial pilot when I was 18 with an instrument rating. The FAA regs state that you cannot become an airline transport pilot, an airline captain, until you reach the age of 23. When I was awarded my ATP on my 23rd birthday, the FAA examiner said to me, "Congratulations, Bryce. You are the youngest airline transport captain in America." Prior to receiving my ATP, I was employed as chief flight instructor at Coronado Flying Service in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Working for Lake Height, the owner of Coronado, was truly a dream job. Teaching, of course, but also flying on-demand charter flights for businesses, the Forest Service, BLM, energy exploration companies, and BIA, which included low-level and Southwest-style bush operations. Talk about exciting work. Then my father and I became partners in a Beechcraft dealership, Aero Club and Flight School back in Utah. This led to my being hired by Beech Aircraft Company as a factory sales representative. Oh, I loved working for Olive Ann Beech, the first lady of aviation. Nonetheless, as I had long been certified as an airline transport pilot, I decided it was time to move on and up. Soon I was flying DC-9s for Eastern Airlines. During this time, I began writing more seriously, and after making several research trips abroad, published a biographical study of 5 heroines entitled Valiant Young Women. Soon thereafter, I wrote 3 books on pioneer aviators, which the publisher printed in a single volume, entitled Valiant Young Men, Heroes of Flight. The true life stories of Eddie Rickenbacker, Jimmy Hall, and Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Here is a radio clip from KSL NBC advertising this work.
Rickenbacker was right on the tail of the enemy aircraft, diving straight down. The burst from his machine gun was only a few seconds, but his aim was deadly. He pulled back hard on his control stick. The strain was too great for his biplane. Suddenly, with a deafening howl, the entire canvas tore from his right wing. Crippled, his plane fell out of control, carving a shape in the air like an hourglass. Now an easy target. He saw tracer bullets from 2 enemy aircraft riddle his dying plane. Looking down on the forests of France, he wondered where he would crash. In his mind, he saw his dear mother opening a cablegram from the War Department.
Oh, God.
Rickenbacker prayed.
Help me get out of this.
Read the true-life inspirational adventures of pioneer aviators Rickenbacker, Hall, and Saint-Exupéry in Bryce D. Gibby's new book, Valiant Young Men, Heroes of Flight.
This ad was followed by another on Jimmy Hall.
Near the end of 1918, combat pilot Jimmy Hall flew his biplane for the last time. He thought of all the young men of valor who had taken to the skies from the Great War's beginning to the armistice. Below his sped, the battlefields lay silent, but the air through which he flew seemed to carry still the death cries of the slain. O men who dwell safely in the lands of liberty, Think of the cost of our ease. We who mature to manhood and grow old with cares only of living, who each day face life and not death. Remember our young brothers who fell in the trenches or from the skies, who left a sweetheart's embrace, never again in mortality to feel her warmth, who never held sons or daughters, and who died before parents. To these valiant young men we owe a debt that can never be repaid. Read the true life inspirational adventures of pioneer aviators in Bryce D. Gibby's new book, Valiant Young Men, Heroes of Flight.
Later, while visiting France and England, I happened upon familiar legends that I found to be very unfamiliar. That is, there was much more history than fable in them, and there were legends entwined with much more truth than myth. For example, when I was doing research on Joan of Arc in Domremy, France, I came upon a prophecy of Merdrin Emrys, that France would be lost by a woman and saved by a virgin. The woman was Isabella of Bavaria, the wife of Charles VI of France, and the virgin was Joan of Arc. However, the question that came to my mind was who made this prophecy, and why was it regarded with such credulity? In English, Merdrin is pronounced Merlin, the same character we read of in the legend of the sword and stone. Merlin, I thought, really? This led me, on my next trip, to Bedgullet, Wales, and the hillock of Dinas Emrys. In short, this led to my writing a tetralogy of tales, 4 books of historical fiction, which has then become the Decalogy of Antiquities. 7 of these books have been published. The first is The Princess of Segovia and the High King. The 7th is Quen. All 7 books are available in print, ebook, and audio formats. Deluxe full-color hardbound editions with graphic art by Wendy Daly, as shown here, are currently available for books 1 and 7, also as full-color ebooks. The other 5 will be republished in the same extraordinary format as Wendy's time allows. All are now available on Audible, produced by Michael Troughton, a BBC voice artist without peer. That you might have a window into these works, we will give you a taste of Michael and Wendy's creativity.
The castle of Segovia was not a fortress. No battles had been fought from its bastions, its curtain walls too low for defence. The castle of Segovia was also not a palace, for the venerable edifice was not elegant or richly styled. Nonetheless, it was a grand house made of white stone and grey slate, adorned with long racemes of purple wisteria, climbing roses and dark green ivy.
Several pages later, we return to Michael Troughton's narration.
From which province comes a messenger? He is sent of Segovia by King Sadiq's brother. Etius quickly arose. Bring your lamp closer, he said, taking the parchment from Felix's hand. He examined the wax seal and recognized at once a familiar insignia. Silently the general read the few words of the parchment. To Etius, thrice consul, hear the groans of the Britons. The barbarians drive us to the sea. The sea drives us to the barbarians. Between these 2 means of death, we are either killed or drowned. He sighed aloud. Felix asked, What is it? A plea, Etius answered. Tell him we can do nothing. He may stay in our protection or leave as he desires. Then return that we may talk, for sleep is gone from me. A short while later, the general and the captain sat upon rough wood-hewn stools, drinking wine from a leathern bottle. Ah, said Felix, would that this was Valyrian ale, and we were again in the enchanted arbour. Tell me again of your princess. Ah, that she was mine, but it shall never be. Just thinking of Vivian is a mighty solace, and is all of her I shall ever possess. Then, admonished Felix, speak of her beauty to keep alive our hearts, which daily petrifies by duties of war. Etius closed his eyes. Have you ever seen another maiden such as the Princess of Segovia? I have not, nor ever shall. I remember her hair, the colour of golden flax, which fell in folds upon her slender neck and upon soft shoulders. Her countenance was as the eastern sun, dispersing night's shadows and radiating hope of a new day's creation. Her skin so white, so translucent, that it seemed to conduit of her soul. Always her dress was austere and chaste. None the less her slender form was more artistic than could be sculpted in marble.
Still later in Chapter 1, Michael's narration continues.
Unexpectedly, an acrid veil rose to meet her as she descended the last hill, and soon a thick, obscuring haze enveloped her. With trepidation, the princess made her way carefully round the final familiar curve of the path and stopped in horror. Blackened skeletons of stone were the only remnants of once lovely cottages, the great ceiling beams reduced to smouldering charcoal. With halting steps, the damsel forced herself to go on. The destruction was recent, yet she could hear no war shouts. She believed the soldiers were gone, and there might be aid to give. The first corpse Vivian came upon was that of a girl of 7, who likely had greeted the enemy horsemen eagerly. The trusting maid would not have suspected danger, for the village had never been accosted. What must have been her horror as she was trampled mercilessly. Vivian knelt by the crumpled body and lifted her small blooded arm. The lifeless limb still wore a bracelet put upon the wrist by the princess herself only a few months before.
Of course, you may download these books from Audible. I only desire to give you an impression of the extraordinary skills of the narrator and graphic artist. Here are a few more examples from Quinn.
Though inquisitive by nature, Gwen seditiously checked her curiosity, especially when she saw or heard things that were not intended for her ears or eyes. Often these mysteries were frightening, causing the young girl to quickly retreat. There was a time when she was gathering mosses in the woods, described in the Seda Codex as a curative for fever and chills, and heard distant screams. Or the early morning she began to descend the outer stairs to the courtyard, and stopped suddenly for rounding a landing when saw the young housemaid mopping up copious amounts of blood from the flagstones. Many times she overheard ritual chants or strange wailings, but in every case the girl carefully but speedily returned to her bedchamber. At midsummer there arose an unlooked-for prospect. Eustace fell very ill, and required the house servant's attention night and day. In the midst of this misery, she sent out one of her guards, knowing that a provincial Saxon king sought her to do magic for him. Gwen was surprised when she was summoned by the mistress and told the difficulty. "Gwen," said Eustace, "I will soon recover, but the time is not yet, and my mind is troubled. I cannot, as I lay here, beseech Freyja, for one may not approach the goddess but in strength. You are indeed clever, and speak but a small part of your thoughts. Tell me, what say you?" "My lady," she answered, "give me until tomorrow, for this is too weighty a matter for one so young as to offer quick counsel." Eustace was sorely disappointed, but replied, "Return at dawn." Gwen desired to supplicate the heavens to ask for wisdom's powers, that she might know how to deal with the crisis before her. But the girl did not know how to pray aright. Gwen looked up at the full moon through an open window. Her thoughts could no longer be constrained, and she exclaimed aloud, "I beseech the powers of heaven, O Ashtoreth! What am I to do?" Silence. Only silence filled her room. Gwen closed her eyes and fell asleep, exhausted. None the less, an hour later, she dreamed a dream. It was not like other dreams, disconnected and absurd. Rather, it was more like when she played high in the trees of the hamlet green and looked down upon villagers and saw their doings. Sometimes she only caught a glimpse through open windows. However, when the women went down to the streamlet that wandered directly beneath the girl to do their washing, she saw every movement and heard every word they said. Gwen had been so quiet that they knew not she was above their heads and heard their secrets. In her dream, she saw scenes like those, but of people she didn't know. "Great Hostess," the girl said, trying to speak with all sincerity, "I answer you. The king who would be your patron and begs your blessing, has he not a son, a manly prince, and is he not of age?" "Yes," said the sorceress, who, though very ill, sat up from her bed on hearing this said by the girl. "How is it that you know this?" Gwen answered, "First, there is more to ask, and then I will tell, if it pleases you." "Say on." "The king he fights, he who has much cattle, has he not a daughter, a beautiful princess?" "Yes." "As you cannot go, send me with a sister and one guard to the mines where dwells the prince, for he is overseer for his father. I will beguile him with love, not for myself, as I am not of age, but for the princess. Then I will charm the damsel with love for the prince. Both will be told to do nothing about their troth until a sign is given." Hostess mused aloud. "What is this? You would end the war with a love match? Can a maiden young as you cast such spells? Yet by Frasier you knew of them and were not told." Without answering questions that were but the Valor's spoken thoughts, Gwen continued. "As for the king, I will bear him a parchment written and sealed by your hand, commanding him in the fear of Seda to cease the war and make double your payment. In your writing, prophesy that through his son the two kingdoms will unite by the ancient stratagem of marriage."
As Gwen is a tale of triumph, of overcoming horrific odds, she must encounter incredible opposition and frightening monstrosities, as told in this excerpt.
Conspiracy was not new to these kings. All were confederates of Asquine and were empowered by his rise to the high throne. However, none had the slightest conception of what was about to transpire. Each king felt himself at the pinnacle of power as he let his eyes fall upon the sensual form of the beautiful sorceress, and let his lips say words that could not be recalled. King Asquine was the last man to take the oath. Gwen snuffed all torches save one. The gaze of Asquine and his vassals were so fixed on the oracle they did not see the being who sat on the golden high throne until he spoke. Startled, none knew how he had entered. In a deep guttural voice, the beast said,
"Do you see not that Gwen kneels? All kneel before me."
Surprised, then horrified, the kings looked upon the monstrous countenance of the giant creature. Only one person had been told he would see the Voldalach, and he had not believed. Asquine trembled, as did the others, as they fell from their seats and made obeisance to the haired thing. He then said,
"Your silence is sworn. None may speak of me beyond this room. Yet within this chamber you will learn the sure black arts of power. Heretofore I have been your unknown master. Now you are knowingly bound to me. Be no more deluded, embrace wholly the darkness of the coming age. Ours is not a destiny of a single lifetime, for we wage war that outlasts millenniums. Nonetheless, gold, not steel, will be your greatest weapon, and you shall have it in abundance. We seek not power over a single land, but shall enslave all lands and all peoples in all times. Arise and take your seats in my council. I am Mayan, keeper of secrets, and you are my vassal lords."
How Quen might be delivered from that awful crisis will not be told now, but I warrant you will not be able to put the book down until you read it. I'll end on a more pleasant note with one final scene.
Sir Thomas, asked Quen, however did you manage to feed all the children who followed you? Please, Quen, he answered humbly with a smile, if you persist in calling me Sir, then I must always address you as Queen, Your Highness, Your Most Royal and Ever Gracious Majesty, or some such thing. No, Thomas will do. In Abona and the Summerlands you are known as Invictus. Ha 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 ha! He laughed jovially. It is good to have such a title when you sojourn among enemies. Tell the truth, said the sage, but do not always correct that which is wrongly said by others. If you set aright even your friends, they may resent you for knowing more than they do. How much more so when among adversaries? Nay, say nothing when they feed their fears. Again he chuckled, then said, In a way it is true for all of us who walk this pleasant way. For all here are unconquerable, at least thus far in our pilgrimage. Pray that we'll be true to the last. But however did you get along? Oh yes, your question. I could ask the same of you, or any man, woman, or child. It is God, our Father, that lends us each breath, that gives us each sip of water and each bit of bread. Just as you have been helped of heaven since you fled Londinium, each child that I have found, or that found me, found some way of getting by.
I inherited far more than flying fever from my dad. He instilled in me the spirit of adventure, the love of the skies, a hunger for truth. Aviation has taken me to places I could never have imagined when I sat at the controls of his home-built aircraft as a young boy. Later, it enabled me to write stories bounded by history and legend of places I could imagine. How? I discovered that the landscapes of legend and lore speak to me. They are touchstones of the past. As I climbed the mystical Tor, where it is said the veil between the past and the preternatural present is slight and diaphanous. As I hiked the slopes of the battlefield of Camlan, where King Arthur fought Mordred, or trod along the banks of the River Tees, the watery abode of the mythical witch, or gazed upon the sunken foundation of the castle of King Vortigern, or stood at the walls of Gavernus, or looked in awe upon the Roman ruins of Jublin, or walked the narrow streets of Lejon and climbed the crumbling ruins of its citadel, or crossed the bridge over the River Rance, or explored the rocky north coast of Brittany, or descended into the dark depths of the forest of the Argoat. All of the Arthurian books I had read, all of 20 years of research, all of my musings and thoughts coalesced into movies that played 1,000 scenes across my mind. I said that 7 of the 10 books of the Decalogy of Antiquities have been published. Book 8, Esta, is now complete and will be available before the end of 2024. The drafts of books 9 and 10 are well underway and will be finished when my mind movies are at last finalized and my keyboard falls silent.